Chapter 6. Welcome home. My child, give me your heart and let your eyes observe my ways. Proverbs 23:26. For a short period after the surgery, I proudly handled our new burdens independently of God. I dutifully thanked Him for the success of the surgery and for the blessings being showered on us by dear family and friends. I was never left alone for long, and never when there was any possibility that a child might need to be lifted. Derek's coworkers covered his responsibilities often, allowing him to be home caring for me and the children. We received meals from friends, acquaintances, and even people we had never met before for the entire 6 weeks I was recovering. Friends made the most beautiful Easter baskets for the children to enjoy, and it was one less project I needed to worry about. What a thoughtful blessing. Another friend came at least once a week to take my two older children on some sort of educational field trip. And another, referred to as the laundry angel, came twice a week to take my dirty laundry, returning it the following day washed and folded, gifting me additionally with her conversation, support, and encouragement. Wow, what a glorious vacation I was having. Despite my awareness of how blessed we were, I was struggling with pain and anxiety about my ability to return to my regular duties in 6 short weeks. I did not, however, invite God to be more involved in this time of struggle. I believed I could and should handle these challenges with independence and strength. It never occurred to me that God would so desperately want to carry me through this time. After birthing 3 children, I felt that liver surgery should be a piece of cake. And when gifted with so much support, it was in fact doable. It was not until a week after the surgery that I truly began to struggle. I was just getting my appetite back, and I soon realized that all food that entered my body, whether a couple of pieces of applesauce or a few ice chips, would soon push back up. The violent vomiting caused great pain and concern as my stomach muscles contracted against the incisions trying to heal from my chest and across my abdomen. Each day that I would dare to eat something, I would sit waiting until early afternoon when I would begin to feel nauseous. The nausea would continue to worsen until sometime between late evening and the middle of the night when I would throw up everything I had tried to eat that day. I began to look forward to the vomiting as the relief after emptying my stomach was immediate. The day after the vomiting began, I returned to Westchester for my surgeon to remove the 22 remaining staples from my abdomen. Derek and I had reported the vomiting the previous day, and although he seemed somewhat concerned, Dr. Fasciuto suggested it was probably just a bug or minor food poisoning. We returned home expecting to not have to deal with the vomiting again. However, 2 hours later, as I was ridding my body of the snack I had eaten that afternoon, the only food I had eaten that day, we waited for several days before calling the surgeon. He called in a prescription thinking this would help the situation. It did not. The doctor sent us to Keller Army Hospital at West Point for 2 liters of IV saline, as I had not kept down even water for several days. By the following week, Dr. Fasciuto asked that I return to Westchester to be admitted. It had become necessary to insert a feeding tube in my nose, and the doctor was hoping that an endoscopy would show the doctors the cause of my difficulties, allowing a diagnosis and cure. By this time, I was weak and hungry, and one night when I got up from my chair, I passed out, presumably from the lack of nutrients. I looked forward to the procedure that should allow the doctors to solve my problem. An endoscopy is performed by a small camera on the end of a tube that is threaded through a larger tube into one's stomach. It sounds unpleasant, yes, but I was told that I would be asleep, and Derek was told if the procedure takes more than 5 minutes, it took too long. I remember how powerful the anesthesia from my surgery had been, and I felt sure that I would remember nothing of this comparatively minor test. I was wrong. For reasons I still do not understand, the anesthesia did not work for me. It made me groggy enough that my gastroenterologist doctor felt he was able to insert a tube down my throat. I remember the nurse repeatedly saying to the doctor, as I tapped her leg, unable to speak due to the tube pressing against my vocal cords and filling my airway, "I don't think she's asleep." The doctor's response was always that it should take only another minute. Unfortunately, a test that should take no longer than 5 minutes took more than an hour and a half. Apparently, my stomach is J shaped. Not a problem unless you're trying to locate with a tube and a camera the area where the stomach empties into the large intestine. Derek sat outside the procedure room, anxious that it was taking much longer than anticipated. Little did he know that I was also conscious as the doctor repeatedly removed and reinserted the tube down my esophagus and into my stomach. It was awful, but I was encouraged once it was over that the doctors would now know how to cease the vomiting and I could finally eat again. The doctors decided that I had a complication called gastroparesis, a paralysis of the stomach, probably caused by nicking a nerve during the surgery, and they were not sure it would correct itself. There was nothing they could do. I remained in the hospital for 4 days, during which time they fed me liquid food through the tube in my nose, which bypassed my stomach and emptied instead directly into my large intestine. The feeding tube rubbed against the back of my throat with every breath, and frequent spritzes of chloroseptic, brought by Derek from a local drugstore, did little to numb my throat or lessen the intense irritation. On the fourth day, my dear friend, who had been staying with my children this second stay in the hospital, came for a visit and brought baby Rebecca with her. It occurred to me that time with my children might do more for my recovery than any additional time in the hospital. The doctors admitted that they were unable to heal my stomach, and although my surgeon had hoped I would stay at least another day for additional food through the feeding tube, he relented when I begged to be released. He looked into the possibility of me going home with the feeding tube in place, but my insurance was unwilling to cover it. Another blessing. My friend drove me home and had to leave almost immediately as she needed to return to her own family in Virginia, more than 5 hours from New York. She left my home sobbing, feeling that my situation had not yet been resolved. She had stayed with my children while Derek stayed with me in the hospital, and my stay there seemed fruitless. That night, after the children were asleep, Derek left to pick up his sister at the airport. She would be staying with us during her spring break from teaching elementary school music. While Derek was gone, I decided to research gastroparesis myself through the internet. What I found was shocking and greatly disturbing. My research confirmed that the vagus nerve had most likely been nicked during surgery. The greatest majority of cases seemed to occur after gallbladder surgery, which had in fact been removed with the liver. However, little to nothing was known about possible ways to reverse the damage. Some cases lasted a short time, others lasted years with no improvement, and still others appeared to disappear only to reoccur later. A feeding tube in the nose was only a temporary solution, often being replaced by what was referred to as a J tube, a plastic canal surgically implanted in one side, allowing liquid food to be poured directly into the base of the stomach. I was most disheartened by a site called Gastroparesis Friends. This was an internet support group which functioned primarily through a chat room. I was not required to join the group or to participate. I was allowed to simply read what others with my condition had written. What struck me most about almost all the entries was the bitterness of the writers. Certainly, I could understand their frustration and anxiety over this horrific condition. But because my experience had thus far been a short one, I could not relate to the defeat echoing repeatedly through the computer screen. One writer referred to food as the enemy, and to holidays centered around meals such as Thanksgiving, torture. A part of me was overcome with empathy for these people, but a greater part of me was terrified to become one of them. I was shocked to read how long many of these people had suffered with gastroparesis. Several months, 2 years, 5 years, 12 years. I realized that night that this was not a simple post surgical complication that would remedy itself. And my research confirmed that there was nothing the medical world could do for me. My eyes filled with tears as my heart filled with fear. How could I care for my children? How could I support my husband? How could I ever train guide dogs again? How could I even get out of bed and take a shower? I was exhausted, confused, and afraid that I may soon need another feeding tube or a J tube surgically implanted in my side. It suddenly occurred to me that I just could not do it. I could not function in my life if this condition continued. I needed help. I turned to the one I knew who could help me. I walked to my bed and I knelt on my knees. Though I pray often and in many different places and postures, I rarely kneel. Perhaps this is part of my problem. From my knees, I prayed a prayer of complete desperation. I admitted that I had tried to carry my burdens independently, and I prayed for forgiveness. I prayed from the depths of my soul. I could no longer do this alone. I prayed that if this was what God wanted for my life, I would live it to the best of my ability. But I could not care for my family in the midst of this condition without His help. Lord, I have no choice but to give my fears over to you. I can no longer do it without you. For me, the importance of this prayer came second only to my prayer for salvation almost 15 years before. I felt God lovingly hold me as I struggled against Him, and I am sure I heard a gentle smile in His voice as He responded, "Kristen, trust me." The next morning began the recovery of my stomach. I could not eat much, but I kept down what I did eat. In fact, I have not vomited since the night I prayed that prayer. In a matter of months, I no longer had difficulty with eating, and my liver remained clear of the cancer. I knew that by placing my faith and trust in God, He had healed me. But our times of struggle were not over. God had many more gifts to give me. Chapter 7. Goodbye, Daddy. My health may fail and my spirit may grow weak, but God remains the strength of my heart. He is mine forever. Psalm 73:26. As I worked each day to regain the life I enjoyed before my surgery, I was blessed by my Father's unceasing care and concern. Michael Grady worked hard at whatever his chosen profession at any given time, spending long hours and offering complete dedication. Often he was away or remained in the office for long hours while I was growing up, but not once did I question his priorities. He adored my mother and would give everything he had worked for in a heartbeat if it would benefit my sister or me in any way. This was no different as I recovered from liver surgery. Every afternoon, I would receive a call from my dad. "How did you eat today?" As my difficulties with my stomach diminished, my heart swelled with the love shown through these daily phone calls. I loved it. My mom reported that after returning from the week spent at the hospital bedside, my dad began attending church alone early each Sunday morning. Although my dad attended church occasionally while I was growing up and had even been involved in church leadership, he had adamantly refused to attend church with me for several years. I'm not sure what caused this determined rejection of organized religion, but it was undeniable. You can understand my shock at hearing that he was now attending church regularly without even the objective of placating a nagging daughter. During one of our daily phone conversations, I questioned my dad on his new Sunday morning commitment. Though he clearly did not wish to discuss it in detail, he thoughtfully replied, "I'm getting my priorities in order." Just 5 months after my surgery, on August 7th, 2003, I awoke at 6:55 a.m. in Washington, D.C., to the whispers of my dear friend who I was visiting there. "Kristen, your sister's on the phone." Not good. My father's organs were failing. He died as I was en route home, flying with my little Rebecca, 1 week shy of her first birthday, while our friends kept Ashley and Luke until Derek was able to get there the following day. I had just left Lakeland after an enjoyable month with my family while Derek was touring with the band. My father had gone into the hospital for a simple outpatient procedure, a procedure that had taken less than 15 minutes. He passed away 36 hours later from a massive infection spreading like wildfire through his otherwise healthy and strong 56-year-old body. Although my faith offered a peace through the hope of me seeing my dad again, his unexpected absence left my entire family with a painful void and in a state of shock. He had reached the fulfillment of his days, and I was thankful for the spiritual growth that God had allowed my dad in just the few short months between my surgery and his death. Christ offered me hope that my dad was part of my future, not only part of my past, but I missed him. And I was saddened to watch my mom struggle to learn to live without her husband and life partner. I was amazed by the void left by my father's sudden absence. I wish I had told him just how much those daily phone calls had meant to me. I thought I had so much time to share with him. It was clear why my mom was struggling so greatly, but I was surprised to witness friends and extended family whose lives were dramatically changed by my father's death. There were even those whom my dad had never met, such as a young girl in a faraway country whom he had sponsored for many years, and an employee who was going to lose his home until my dad bought the house and rented it back to him until the man was able to repay his debt. Both of these generous acts were unbeknownst to the rest of our family, including my mother. I was also surprised by my own intense heartache and the seemingly unending catastrophic grief of my sister, who had, since college, lived near my parents and had for the past few years worked daily by my father's side. When my thoughts were rational, it seemed that losing a parent should be a natural occurrence in one's life and should therefore be relatively easy to face. However, the loss of my father has been without a doubt the most difficult experience of my life thus far. I wonder if that is because my father was so young and his death so sudden and so tragic. Or perhaps it is this painful for the loss of any parent. I felt feelings of abandonment, though I knew my father would not have chosen this time to be separated from his family. This feeling of abandonment is one I fear my own children may someday soon experience. Shocking the family once again, my grandfather, my dad's father, died a few months later. I believe he died of a broken heart after the loss of my dad. How amazing is the life of just one individual. Many people were deeply saddened by the loss of my father and grandfather. Many lives were drastically changed forever. I did not realize the effect these two great men had on their family, their friends, and their community until after they were gone. What a blessing to have been loved by them. Chapter 8, Refiner's Fire. So be truly glad. There is wonderful joy ahead, even though it is necessary for you to endure many trials for a while. These trials are only to test your faith, to show that it is strong and pure. It is being tested as fire tests and purifies gold, and your faith is far more precious to God than mere gold. So if your faith remains strong after being tried by fiery trials, it will bring you so much praise and glory and honor on the day when Jesus Christ is revealed to the whole world. 1 Peter 1, 6-7. Although the doctors had assured us of their success in my surgery, it was standard procedure for a person with a cancer diagnosis to return for scans every 3 months for a few years. As much as I disliked the crystal light concoctions, I did as I was told, but worried little about cancer in my future. It had been removed from my body with safe margins and was a non-aggressive cancer. I was done. I was a cancer survivor. Sounds impressive, huh? Not so much. 15 months later, in early October 2004, Dr. Fasciuto called. Note, the call came the same day as the scan. Never a good sign. To report spots, which had been noted at the base of my lungs. Spots? Lungs? Huh? I was terribly confused. I had liver cancer. Could it then move to the lungs? Could it be that another type of cancer was growing? The doctor assured me that it was most likely a cold, and we would reevaluate after my next scan 3 months later. But I had been quite healthy, experiencing no colds at all that fall season. You must know by now that this was not a satisfactory answer for my husband. Derek's immediate and thorough research showed that when this cancer metastasized, it moves like most other cancers, with the flow of the blood. Next stop from the liver, the lungs. We also learned that although fibrolamellar is a slow-growing cancer, it is also a very resilient cancer, often metastasizing and almost impossible to kill. The only known effective treatment was surgery. Our concern led Derek to make an appointment with the only oncologist covered by our health insurance, a local doctor. We accepted the first available appointment, which was on a day that Derek was unable to miss work. I assured him that I would be fine alone. Derek hand-delivered my files a few days before my appointment, encouraging the nurse behind the desk to ensure that the doctor read the file before our appointment. She stated that the doctor was busy, but would certainly try, to which Derek's reply was stern. I love this. I would be willing to bet that I know more about this type of cancer than the doctor. Please have him prepare for this appointment. I love that man. 2 days later, I walked into the doctor's office, hopeful that this oncologist could answer our questions and ease our concerns. As he walked into the exam room, he began with questions that suggested he had not yet glanced at my case file. He soon excused himself to go to his office to better familiarize himself with my case. After about 15 minutes, he returned, questioning the existence of any tumors. I explained that they were on the lung. He replied that he had not checked there and returned to his office. When he returned a few minutes later, he began to laugh. The spots on your lung are so small as the point of my pencil. Why are you concerned about spots so small? As he continued to laugh, I felt completely foolish. I suppose he had answered my questions. There was obviously nothing about which we needed to concern ourselves. However, is it not understandable for a person who had experienced cancer before to be concerned about a reoccurrence? As I left the office, the doctor called out to me, "Don't forget to schedule your follow up appointment." Follow up appointment? You must be joking. 6 weeks passed, during which time the scan results lingered in the back of our minds. But I was fairly confident it was nothing until one Friday morning in early October, when a surgeon at Keller Hospital contacted me unexpectedly and asked me to come in that morning to talk with him about my recent scan results. Upon meeting him, I learned that an administrative nurse had taken an interest in my case and had asked this doctor to look at my file. He had asked radiology to look at all past scans, which showed the spots had existed as long as 10 months before, but had been smaller and were consequently difficult to detect without knowing what to look for and where to look. He also explained that the few spots on the base of the lungs were seen on a scan of the abdomen, where just the tips of the lungs could be seen. No scans had been taken of the lungs themselves. What? Derek and I were able to learn that the lungs were the most likely site of metastases. So, how could the lungs not be included in the regular scans? The next logical step was for a scan of the lungs to be completed to see if any other spots existed in the lungs. The scan was scheduled for the following Monday. The doctor from Keller Army Hospital called just an hour after the completion of the lung scan. Uh-oh. His first words to me were, "This is not good." My lungs were riddled with small spots, and two larger tumors were also found, about 3 centimeters in size, one on the right lung and one on the heart. The doctor expressed his very strong opinion that this type of cancer was not treatable, and very few survived past the 5-year marker. He told me that the oncologist may try to treat me with a strong chemotherapy that would undoubtedly knock me on my, but that it was unlikely to make a difference in my survival. I was going to need to see an oncologist, and the flurry began. Derek spoke to oncologists and or their assistants all over the country. The fibrolamellar variant of hepatocellular carcinoma is extremely rare, and we found that many liver oncologists had never even seen a case. Derek spoke to a doctor at Johns Hopkins Cancer Center, Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, Mayo Clinic of Minnesota, the Houston Cancer Center, and several others. He asked each how many cases of this type of cancer they had handled and what treatment plans they might offer. Derek was most impressed with a young doctor at Sloan Kettering named Dr. Gaston Abou-Alfa. Dr. Abou-Alfa had conducted an experimental treatment for 50 patients with FHC, fibrolamellar hepatocellular carcinoma. Derek was also impressed that Dr. Abou-Alfa was willing to talk with him personally about my situation and what he might be able to do for me. His credentials were impressive, his knowledge clear, and his confidence high. Derek liked him immediately. Then came the problem of our military insurance covering our transfer to an out-of-network doctor. They stated that they would prefer me to see the local oncologist. Not going to happen. And there was no way that we would be allowed to even consult with a doctor from Sloan Kettering. But Derek had made up his mind. We prayed, we slept, and the next morning we received a call that our request had been approved. Thank you, God. We were given unlimited visits for 6 months, at which time my case would be reevaluated. Wow. How is it that I am unable to trust more when God consistently takes care of everything? 2 days later, we were sitting in Dr. Alba Alpha's office, waiting for his prediction for my future. The doctor rushed in, clearly busy and having squeezed us into his full appointment schedule, but his manner was kind. He settled into a chair, and his attitude showed that he was not going to rush away until every question on Derek's lengthy list was answered, and we were completely satisfied and at ease. Despite his care, knowledge, and concern, Dr. Alba Alpha is not one to offer false hopes. He explained that while this cancer grew slowly relative to other cancers, it is resistant to all known treatments. Surgery was not an option for two reasons. First, the tiny tumors covering my lungs were impossible to count, much less to remove individually. Second, because the cancer had metastasized from the primary cancer site and was now considered systemic or stage 4, the cancer was in the bloodstream and would likely grow elsewhere if it was even possible to remove the existing tumors. He offered hope in an experimental treatment currently being offered at Sloan Kettering. Another patient with my diagnosis was experiencing success on this treatment. He defined success as just less than a year of treatment with no growth of the cancer. The treatment was not able to kill the cancer in this other patient, but it had successfully arrested its growth. No definite decisions were made during that first consultation, as many tests were needed to confirm that this would be our best course of action. The following 2 or 3 weeks involved several meetings with Dr. Alba Alpha, multiple tests, another scan, and a biopsy to confirm that the cancer on my lungs was the same as the cancer removed from my liver. Because the size and location of the liver tumor had necessitated surgery regardless of whether it was benign or malignant, I had not before experienced a biopsy. For the procedure, I returned to Westchester Medical Center, where my liver had been resected not 2 years prior, and where I soon after returned for the treatment of the paralyzation of my stomach. It was during that second stay at Westchester Medical Center that I had endured the endoscopy fully awake, and it was this procedure that was in my mind while I waited to have the biopsy. I waited in the same room, in the same bed in which I had waited for my surgery 15 months before. And although this procedure was minor compared to the liver resection, my anxiety was much greater. Every moment of every day since the metastases had been discovered, I had feared for the future of my children and my husband. Combined with that ceaseless fear was the frightening memory of the endoscopy not proceeding as it should have, one I feared would be repeated during this procedure. The technicians did not ease my fear as they explained to Derek and me that the tumor they wished to biopsy was touching both the lung and the heart. As I took each breath, it moved. During each beat of my heart, it moved. It was not an easy target, and they informed us of the risk that my lung might be punctured by the large needle necessary to complete the procedure. As it turned out, this test was an easy one. A small area on my chest was numbed where they were to insert the needle. I was moved into a CT scan machine to allow the technicians to watch as they inserted the needle. They asked me to hold my breath, and within a few seconds, the procedure was done. No pain, no punctured lungs. They asked me to remain in the hospital for several hours to watch my lungs, and I was released that night. My sister-in-law stayed with us the entire day. Her knowledge as a nurse and her gift as an incredibly caring human being was priceless that day. How grateful I was that God had arranged this procedure during a week when she and her husband were visiting. They made the week fun instead of scary. Once all of these tests had been completed, it was finally agreed upon by the doctors that the best course of action, actually the only course of action, was the previous discussed treatment. This treatment was a combination of 3 intravenous chemotherapy drugs, 1 experimental drug combined with 2 FDA-approved drugs. The protocol called for a full day at the Memorial Sloan Kettering Outpatient Center in New York City, the only location where the treatment could be dispensed. I was to come 2 out of every 3 weeks for blood work and begin with a quick appointment with the doctor to determine that I was strong enough to handle the treatment. I would wait an hour or so for the treatment to be ordered and processed in the pharmacy. I would then be led back to the chemo suite, where the IV would be inserted into my arm and the first treatment begun. Cisplatin was given first, over an hour-long period. Irinotecan, also known as CPT-11, was administered next, over a half-hour period. I was then given another liter of fluid to flush the kidneys of the poison that had just been pushed into my bloodstream. I then had a 3-hour break before returning to the outpatient center for the administration of the final drug, flavoplaridol, which was given over a 4-hour period. I usually arrived at the treatment center at 7:15 in the morning in order to leave by 6 or 7 that evening. Sometimes I was able to leave shortly after 5, but some nights I was there until after 9. The doctor's description of these days sounded simply awful, but I had yet to learn how God would use them to be some of the most cherished days of my life. Although we were thankful for a treatment option, Dr. Abba Alpha insisted that the treatment would eventually fail and the cancer would be terminal. I admit that there were nights during that time when I awoke terrified, considering the very real possibility that my 3 small children could be raised without a mother, and that my husband might unwillingly face the lonely task of single parenthood. And how could my mother survive another loss so soon after the death of my father? For weeks, my heart was literally seized with fear. I had difficulty breathing. I experienced minor chest pains and I felt perpetually nauseous. During that time, I did not pray for healing. I did not pray for answers. I prayed only for peace. One night, in my desperate search for peace, I found comfort in the one place I knew I could find it. When I opened my Bible, I discovered Psalm 35. Weeping may continue for a night, but joy comes with the morning. I closed my Bible, closed my eyes, and contemplated what I had just read. I was overwhelmed with the comfort brought to me by this inspired verse. In an attempt to read the verse once again, I mistakenly turned to Proverbs 3:5, a human mistake with providential blessings. This verse reads, "Trust the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding." My heart immediately burst into song. I had not seen this verse for 20 years, but I instantly remembered a beautiful tune I learned in church as a child that accompanied this powerful scripture. God, through these 2 verses, brought me great comfort and the beginning of the peace of God, which transcends all understanding. Philippians 4:7. A peace not only for my more recent fears initiated by the cancer, but all fears I held regarding my children or my family. I have ceased my prior habit of laying awake at night, worrying over how to protect my children from circumstances over which I have no control. I had no earthly reason to feel better, but over the following days and weeks, the nausea disappeared, the chest pain stopped, and my breathing improved completely. God had showed me while on my knees almost 2 years before that I needed to trust him with my life. He was now asking me to trust him with theirs. I heard him again speak gently to me. Kristen, do you trust me with them? With the life of my beloved husband, the fragile lives of my children, the shaken life of my mom, and the lives of all those whom I love most dearly? He told me that it was not my job to care for and protect these people. It was his, and he never fails. He is infinitely loving and infinitely wise, and he is not limited by death. He would never leave them. On Rebecca's wall is painted Ephesians 3:18. How wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ, as promised in both Deuteronomy 31:6 and Hebrews 13:5. He will never fail us. And when translated exactly from the Greek, this verse becomes a triple negative. No, I will, no, not ever leave you nor forsake you. I love that. These intense fears for my family initiated an awareness of my time in the refiner's fire. I cannot deny that time in the fire is physically, emotionally, and spiritually painful, but God is faithful. To help you understand the idea behind the refiner's fire, let me share with you a passage by an unknown woman that was shared with me. Malachi 3:3. He will sit as a refiner and purifier of silver. This verse puzzled some women in a Bible study, and they wondered what this statement meant about the character and nature of God. One of the women offered to find out the process of refining silver and get back to the group at their next Bible study. That week, the woman called a silversmith and made an appointment to watch him at work. She didn't mention anything about the reason for her interest beyond her curiosity about the process of refining silver. As she watched the silversmith, he held a piece of silver over the fire and let it heat up. He explained that in refining silver, one needed to hold the silver in the middle of the fire where the flames were hottest, as to burn away all the impurities. The woman thought about God holding us in such a hot spot. Then she thought again about the verse that says, He sits as a refiner and purifier of silver. She asked the silversmith if it was true that he had to sit there in front of the fire the whole time the silver was being refined. The man answered that yes, he not only had to sit there holding the silver, but he had to keep his eyes on the silver the entire time it was in the fire. If the silver was left a moment too long in the flames, it would be destroyed. The woman was silent for a moment. Then she asked the silversmith, How do you know when the silver is fully refined? He smiled at her and answered, Oh, that's easy. When I see my image in it. This is where I've been, I thought, the moment I read this passage. My God wanted me to be mature and complete, not lacking anything. So he took me in his loving hands and gently placed me in the refiner's fire. He sits as a refiner and purifier of silver. Malachi 3:3. As a silversmith must place the silver in the middle of the flame, where the fire is the hottest, to refine the precious metal, so must God allow these trials in my life to refine me. I felt God gently removing the impurities from my life, which eventually brought blessings of great joy and a renewed closeness to my Maker. Like the silversmith, who must never remove his eyes from the fire, lest the silver remain too long and be destroyed, I was continuously aware of God's awesome presence, never once taking his eyes off of our suffering family. God assured me repeatedly of his everlasting and unconditional love through gifts and great blessings. If I did not know that God was just and loved us all equally, I would have been convinced during that time in the fire that I, Kristen, was his most favorite child. What miraculous peace and joy this brings in the midst of great struggle. Remember, please, that God will never allow us to burn in the fire. Furthermore, He will never sacrifice us for the benefit of others. At times, I have thought such things as perhaps I will be allowed to die, motivating one of my children to grow to be a great scientist who will be driven to find the cure for cancer. This would be worth my sacrifice. Well, the glory is not for me, it is for God. He has told me clearly that He loves me dearly. He would not sacrifice me for one or for multitudes. He does not work that way. Jesus' sacrifice was the only one necessary and the only sacrifice God will allow. Whatever I am allowed to endure, it is for my good. If others benefit, that further demonstrates the grace of God. But my suffering is first and foremost not for the benefit of others, but for the benefit of me and my relationship with Him. There came a time when we needed a break from the fire, and God granted us an amazing time of peace. I am thankful for the pause from the pain, but I long for that closeness I felt to God while there. I am enjoying the peace and joy God has graciously granted us for this season, and I know He is with us now as always. But I know now that God offers us a special sighting of His presence when we are struggling through the fire. He walks there with us. He ensures that we do not feel alone, unloved, punished, or abandoned. What a gracious God we serve. I do believe I will someday return to the refiner's fire. And while I do not welcome the trials, I anxiously await His increased attention. While I would with great joy accept divine healing, I would never wish to erase my experience or forfeit the lessons God has gifted to me. During my time in the fire, God has been disciplining me. The fire is intended to discipline, not to punish. I believe these words are often confused. Discipline is defined by Webster's dictionary as training to act in accordance with rules. Discipline means to train or to instruct. The word disciples is derived from the word discipline. Jesus was training the disciples, and now He is training me. Apparently, I have needed much discipline, and I'm overwhelmingly grateful for it. How can I choose any response except to worship Him mightily for this opportunity? No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. Hebrews 12:11. Yes, discipline is sometimes painful. You can ask my 4-year-old daughter, have you ever heard a child express gratitude for discipline? Based on my experience with my children, I assume it is quite rare. But I have hope that they grow to someday silently appreciate our effort as strict parents. Others have told me that I have always been a strong disciplinarian for my children. In this way, I am like my mother. And when I am told this, I do not take offense, although I'm sure at times offense was meant. I believe that discipline combined with unconditional love in these younger years is incredibly important for the development of godly character and gentle hearts. God has been an active and available Father to me these past difficult years. He has graciously taken the time to discipline me so that I may be just slightly more like Him. And you have forgotten that word of encouragement that addresses you as sons. My son, do not make light of the Lord's discipline, and do not lose heart when He rebukes you, because the Lord disciplines those He loves, and He punishes everyone He accepts as a son. Endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as sons. For what son is not disciplined by his father? If you are not disciplined, and everyone undergoes discipline, then you are illegitimate children and not true sons. Moreover, we have all had human fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them for it. how much more should we submit to the Father of our spirits and life? Our fathers disciplined us for a little while as they thought best, but God disciplines us for our good, that we may share in his holiness. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. Hebrews 12, 5-11. I was asked by a close friend to speak about what God has taught me through my recent trials. Another sweet friend confided in me later that she was touched by my talk, as she had also recently found herself in the refiner's fire. She further added with a smile, though I never thought to call it the refiner's fire. I called it hell. We shared a good laugh. At the conclusion of my talk, I was asked to interpret in sign language the special music that would be sung. I was not aware of the song her friend had chosen, but was greatly surprised and pleased with how God touched my heart through her choice. She sang a song entitled Held by Christian artist Natalie Grant. The song speaks about the refiner's fire, about the promises God gives us to comfort us, and about the abundant blessings God grants during these times of trial. Allow me to share the inspired words I heard for the first time as I prepared my signs. 2 months is too little. They let him go. They had no sudden healing. To think that Providence would take a child from his mother while she prays is appalling. Who told us we'd be rescued? What has changed, and why should we be saved from nightmares? We're asking why this happens to us who have died to live. It's unfair. This is what it means to be held, how it feels when the sacred is torn from your life and you survive. This is what it is to be loved and to know that the promise was when everything fell, we'd be held. This hand is bitterness. We want to taste it. Let the hatred know our sorrows. The wise hand opens slowly to the lilies of the valley and tomorrow. This is what it means to be held, how it feels when the sacred is torn from your life and you survive. This is what it is to be loved and to know that the promise was when everything fell, we'd be held. If hope is born of suffering, if this is only the beginning, can we not wait for 1 hour watching for our Savior? This is what it means to be held, how it feels when the sacred is torn from your life and you survive. This is what it is to be loved and to know that the promise was when everything fell, we'd be held.